Bennedict Mathurin and Andrew Nembhard have been great for the Pacers recently, but what does that mean when they overlap with Tyrese Haliburton in the future? Plus, what does Buddy Hield's play with the bench say about how he can help this Pacers team going forward? And Pacers Knicks tonight, what can the Pacers learn from the Knicks' downturned season last year, turned into a solid season this year? We'll get to it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, some interesting topics to get into late in this Pacers season. They're officially eliminated, but still lots for them to learn and try to identify about their future, starting with their rookies. Bennedict Mathurin and Andrew Nembhard have been terrific of late, have been expanding their games, have been having more responsibility. And what does that mean when they eventually have to do all that with Tyrese Haliburton on the floor? How can those three coexist together? How can they share the ball and the floor? We'll talk about all that with Rhett Bauer today, who's been on many times, used to write for 8.9 seconds, now with iPacersblog, and many other places. We also discussed Buddy Hield, his new bench role that he's in right now. How does that look? What does that say about how he fits with lineups that don't feature Haliburton? And at the end, talk a little bit of Knicks, because it's Pacers Knicks tonight. Little about the game, instead more about the Knicks, who went from a great season to a terrible season back to a great season. How can the Pacers avoid that same fate and keep growing into next year? Rhett and I will get to it all today. Let's go. We are now joined by Rhett Bauer. I should do background. He's written most recently for iPacersblog, but you've heard him here before, and you probably will hear him again next week because the Pacers season's about to end, and he knows the CBA the best of anybody else who talks frequently about this Pacers team. But today, 3 weekdays left in the Pacers season, 3 games left in the Pacers season. Got to talk about some young guys meshing. I think it's been interesting that the Pacers have seen some growth and improvement from Bennedict Mathurin and Andrew Nembhard, their 2 best rookies recently. Nembhard looking awesome passing the ball. Mathurin's splits have been great since he's been starting. He's guarding tougher players. That's all fantastic. What does it mean when those two have to play with Tyrese Haliburton, when the team is meshing and growing? That is the ensuing question that will be answered next season. Rhett, all these players have been playing well. They're doing good stuff with the ball. What do you like about the fit of those three? What concerns do you have? How do you feel like the Pacers need to navigate forward with that young trio?
Yeah, I think that there are some complementary skills, but there's also some redundancy in a way that I don't know how to properly build a roster around that. Obviously, Haliburton is the engine of everything, but Haliburton is also the best shooter of the three. And so then you're like, okay, but you're not going to give the ball to Bennedict Mathurin so that Haliburton can space. Like, sure, maybe if Mathurin really grows as a scorer and he's got a physical matchup, something like that, but you're not going to plan for that. And then Nembhard, same thing. Like, he needs to shoot a ton, but you can't rely on him to space the floor, and defenses just don't care if he's out there in a way that helps give Haliburton some space. So, but at the same time, like, Nembhard can be a connecting piece. We've seen him run some offense.
At times.
Yeah. And then obviously Mathurin has just his relentless rim pressure, and that's awesome because Haliburton, he isn't like the most, obviously he's not like the most physically gifted player. So he kind of uses angles, uses misdirection and screen navigation, and uses his eyes to move people around to get to the rim. But the way Mathurin does it is a way that really fits well next to Haliburton. I just worry about first off, the scoring that Mathurin has lacked while playing next to Haliburton. It seems like he's not in the flow of things in a way that is that you would hope for after a certain number of games. I think it's like 50-something games of them playing together. I don't know. It's not as encouraging as I would have liked. It's not as seamless as I would have hoped for 3 players that do have complementary skill sets on offense. And then on defense, it's you're relying a lot on Andrew Nembhard to guard some really, really tough players.
Yeah, it is a unique challenge that they'll face of getting these players to fit together. Like Mathurin since starting. Let's talk about his total stats, because then I will squash them immediately, right? 16 points per game, 52, 38, 85 splits. That's his last 8 games, right? Since he moved into the starting 5. 15 points or more in 6 of the 8 games. The 2 games he didn't score 15 points or more were the 2 games that Haliburton played, and he had 4 and 2. And he's not that level of worse playing with Haliburton. The numbers say that they fit pretty well together in terms of how the 5-man lineups look. But how it maximizes those 2 specifically, still a lot of work in progress to figure out. Now you add in that Nembhard has shown like, hey, I can do some stuff when I have this basketball in my hand. Like I can set up my teammates. And he has experience all year as a complimentary player. But when you think about these guys, it's like when there's only one ball and clearly there's a best shooter creator with this group, like how do you make it all mesh? How do you make everybody be playing to their strengths in a way that's constructive? And I think that is going to be an interesting balance to figure out. I still think it's important that Mathurin and Nembhard, very important, that Mathurin and Nembhard are growing with their ball skills down the stretch of the season. The more responsibility they're getting, the better. That will allow them to do more, even if they do go to more off-ball roles going forward. But like you look at their usages, even in just 2-man lineups, right? When Mathurin and Haliburton play together, Haliburton's usage 26%. That makes sense. Mathurin's all the way down at just under 20, 19.95. That's technically below average. I mean, it's exactly average, right? 20% is 1/5. That if you don't get how usage rate works. When it's Haliburton and Nembhard out there together, Haliburton's usage rate 24%. Makes sense. Nembhard's usage rate in those moments. Let me scroll down for a second. 12.9.
Oh, geez.
Of plays, right? And now that is clouded a lot by that they started together. So you got Buddy Hield and Miles Turner taking a ton of shots. Like it's not going to be that low going forward forever. Either way, like it's going. That's just with 2-man duos. We can get to the trios in a second, but like it's going to be hard for them. They are all getting better. They're all improving. That's good. They'll know how to do stuff when they have the ball against a crack defense. That's good. They're going to have to figure out how to not be your turn, my turn, and how to be complementary, if that means adding shooting skills or defensive skills or something. But it's going to be hard for the 3 guys who have shown like we can do stuff with the ball to be that level of good and use that growth constructively together when there is, again, this is overblown phrase in the NBA discourse, but when there is only one ball.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I love roster construction. I love roster building. I love basketball, obviously, but the ins and outs of putting 5 players that fit well together and then obviously expanding that to the bench. I really love that. Maybe it comes back to my dynasty fantasy basketball stuff. But when I look at a 5-man lineup, it's like, okay, what are you doing if you're not scoring? And right now, the answer to that question for Bennedict Mathurin is basically nothing. And that is
I would
not basically not nothing, but like defensively not great, offensively like he is okay on cuts and he's a decent shooter, but like it's kind of concerning where the lack of like, okay, I'm going to contribute in this way. I just don't see a lot of that right now.
So he was really good as that off-ball mover early in the season. Remember, like that was how he would wiggle free and get open. But he was kind of figured out like, oh, he's good at this, and then it became a little harder. But I still think there's a baseline there that makes me believe in that a little bit more than you.
Yeah, and that's true too. It does feel, and maybe that's just the course of this regular season taking a toll. It's like you're not as psyched up to be moving around without the ball a whole bunch, and you're more willing to stand there and wait for it to be your turn. Sure. So that could easily be part of it. And obviously, as they're losing, whereas they were winning early in the season, overachieving and all that could also play a factor. But yeah, maybe I'm being too pessimistic about Mathurin and his abilities without scoring, but Nembhard I'm not as worried about in that regard because he does play good defense and he does move the ball a little bit. But it's weird seeing them all 3 together because it seems like they being Mathurin and Nembhard just like withdraw in themselves and are watching what's going on instead of taking advantage of the advantages that Tyrese Haliburton creates with his passing.
So here's the interesting stats that go a little bit against what I just said. When they're all 3 together, right? We've seen this season for 312 minutes. That is not a big sample at all, but that's like a decent, like you've seen it, you get it, it's evolved, right? Tyrese Haliburton's usage rate in those 312 minutes, 25%. Honestly, might be a little low, but that's fine, right? That's good. Mathurin's usage in those minutes, 21%, 20.7 to be exact. Yeah, that's good. That makes sense. Sure. Nembhard's is 12.7, right? And so that's super low. And so they have shown in that way. I think that is interesting that those three are sub 60 total, right? I think 60, 65, 70% of your possessions even would run through those guys. So how? And what does that look like? How does that elevate the 5-man unit when they're out there? Because they have been pretty solid with that trio, like as a team. Not awesome, but for a young team, you'll take it. So they're plus 16 in those minutes. They won them. Like, that's good. So clearly it works. It's just like, how is it going to maximize every single player when they don't have the ball all the time? And so again, like, I feel like I'm talking in circles a little bit. The good thing about the end of this season is the Pacers are their young guys are obviously improving, like game to game. You can see it. The question becomes is how does that growth fit into what it looks like the Pacers are building towards when these guys are in their best role or at their apex, whenever that happens to be.
Yeah, and I don't think we are anywhere close to having that answer, and nor should we be, honestly. Like, 1 year of them playing together in a variety of different roles, obviously they're going to grow so much as players individually. They're going to get a lot more comfortable together, and then hopefully the Pacers are going to have some pretty significant players added to the roster here in a couple months too. So there's so much data gathering to be done. Yes. And that could kind of be a cop out of like, oh, it's fine. Like they're going to grow and all that stuff. But like, you still want to see some promising flashes. And I think you pointing out that they are a positive is okay. Sure. Like, if the individual stats aren't there, the production isn't kind of where you would hope it would be. At least they're winning. Like, at least they are good out there together as a team, which is kind of I think that's better to do it that way, is where you're like, okay, at least as a team, we are out there, we are winning. And then you can kind of find your pockets within that to grow individually, either within that lineup or just in your own minutes without all three of them out there. And the craziest part to me is that, I mentioned this before we started, like Nembhard, Haliburton, Mathurin in the games that they played 6.4 minutes together per game. Wow. That's just crazy. That's so low.
If you made me guess that number before we were talking, I would have guessed like almost 15. No, I mean,
that's what I was gonna say. 12,
like 12.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't feel like it was ever too low. There was not one game where I was like, they didn't mix and match their young guys enough. Like,
no. So I kind of want to go through game log and see, like, okay, like 49 games that they played together. Like, what was going on that they just didn't get out there on the floor together? So again, another point to data gathering of like, okay, that's not a huge sample size at all. And it's a season that has a lot of moving pieces at the 4 and 5 slot. And so you can point to that as well. But ultimately, being a positive on the floor, that's kind of that's a pretty good takeaway for how bad this team kind of was the whole year.
Agreed. No alarms for me at all, but it is an interesting thing to think about that all these guys are getting better at skills that require touching the basketball. I'll conclude by saying they've actually played 51 games together, Rhett. They went 26 and 25 in those games. More encouraging stuff, right? Like,
that's a playoff team.
They fit that's close. And these, like, in a lot of ways, like from a team level perspective, it's like it's already working, right? Like, what are we talking about? But it's not how is it working in year one of your build. It's how is it working in the future, and what skills does it take for that to be maximized? And that's what I think will be fascinating going forward. I would like to thank everybody for making Locked On Pacers their first listen today and every single day. Oh my God, what a night in the NBA that Tuesday has become. Pacers not happy with these results from a draft perspective. The Magic lost, the Wizards lost, the Rockets won, the Blazers lost. It was not a fun day for the Pacers. We'll see about the Spurs. So they'll be rooting very much for San Antonio down the stretch of the season. Make your second listen any of those teams that either did not do what the Pacers wanted or maybe pulled off an upset. What's up, guys? Quick little break here to talk about eBay Motors. We're a championship team. It's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, at the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Let's pivot, Rhett, to talking about a not young player at all. In fact, a much older player, Buddy Hield, who has been moved to the second unit recently. the correct choice to get Mathurin in as a starter. I asked Buddy Hield about it. He's like, as long as I'm playing, it's fine. He is such a good shooter and elevates lineups by adding spacing alone. Like, that's great. The on-off numbers are like, hey, you're very helpful for the offense of this team. I'm curious, though, what this looks like for him going forward. Is he as like, do you feel like he's just not as good without Tyrese Haliburton? Their chemistry sublime, or do you feel like he can still elevate in a mostly similar way a unit when he's playing with a TJ McConnell, Andrew Nembhard, someone else other than Tyrese Haliburton running the show?
I definitely think there's something to the synergy that Buddy and Halliburton have, because it just seems like no matter what, Haliburton just knows where Buddy is. And that's why he can just jump in the air and decide who he's passing it to when he's in the air on the way down, because he just knows where he is all the time. And obviously that's just not going to be the case with the rest of the roster, but he's been here for an entire season now, plus a handful of games at the end of the year where he played with a lot of these guys. So you kind of want to see like some of that chemistry develop as well. But I think his shooting is just going to translate no matter what. It's just, I do think there's something to it not being as impactful in a lineup like with Haliburton, especially because, you know, you got Miles out there who's a completely different offensive threat than somebody like Jalen Smith or Isaiah Jackson. Obviously, TJ McConnell's very different than Tyrese Haliburton. So the defensive attention is a little bit different. But then on the flip side of that, it's like, okay, so the talent should be different too going against second units. So I'm not as worried about it. I would hope that he could find his groove with a more realistic role moving forward with this team. But again, small sample size with this sort of stuff. I'm not worried too much about it. When he just shoots the ball so well, it's hard to not make that productive.
He's going to finish first in the league in 3-pointers made, like deservedly so consistent, plays all the time. 1,500 minutes of Haliburton plus Hield plus any other three players this season. 119 offensive rating. 119.7, nearly 120. That's insane. That is bananas good, right?
Yeah.
Clearly those two have something that is effective, is hard to guard, and when they can both shoot, opens up the floor for everybody else to also score at a level that you go, oh, wow, this team is scoring like crazy. This is not a conversation about defense, but their defensive rating is bad with those two guys. But, you know, clearly the numbers show that, and we can see their chemistry with our eyes and talk to them. Like, clearly there's something there. Buddy Hield and TJ McConnell, the backup with the bench. Less minutes significantly, right? That's obviously a factor here. Only 658 offensive rating, 113.4. The Pacers have with those two. Defensive rating is much better, but the offensive rating is worse, right? The chemistry is not the same. The quality of the rest of the players is not the same. There's a lot of numbers to this. They have less chemistry. They didn't come from the same team. That's different. Nembhard plus Hield. Now, granted, some of these lineups I'm saying could also have Tyrese Haliburton in them, but still, Nembhard plus Hield, 114.3 offensive rating. The last two numbers with McConnell and Nembhard, are like slightly below league average offensive ratings versus like one of the best teams in the league level with Haliburton. So does it make the team a little worse on the offensive side? Yeah, it does. Yes, like it does. But I don't think it neuters what Hield does necessarily. It's just he's not. I think it's as simple as he's not playing with the guy in the NBA that he fits like absolutely best with because of their chemistry and time together and understanding of each other. This is not a knock on any of the other point guards or the Pacers roster construction. It's just if you're going to have Hield on your team, as they do and might next year, playing him as much with Tyrese Haliburton as possible, even if it's not as a starter, seems like almost an imperative goal just to absolutely maximize what he brings to your team.
The hard part there is doing that while also playing the two future pieces that are most likely to be here in Mathurin and Nembhard. So I think that's kind of where all of that breaks down, and then you get into the same situation that we've been in all year where it's like, how the heck do you find playing time for all of these guys in a way that gives you information about what the team is going to be moving forward? And I think at this point, you know what Tyrese Haliburton and Buddy is. Like, you know what that is, and you know what Buddy will provide regardless of who's out there with him. I think it's just the effectiveness of that, like rounded together with the players he's with, is what is obviously going to change. But I think there's enough information there where I'm not as worried about making sure that Buddy and Haliburton share the court all of the time. If there are other matchups or other combinations that you just need to get more information on, like Mathurin, Nembhard, and Haliburton, like if they should not be playing 6 minutes a game together. Like I bet you if I looked up Buddy's combination of both of those players, it's probably more than 6 minutes a game. And so like this is just one of those things where the priorities probably should shift next year, and I'm sure that they will. And there's a lot going on this offseason, but knowing that those two are just going to be excellent together on the floor is great moving forward. You can just fall back to that no matter what.
Yeah, some of the tricky stuff I said, like you look at the Nembhard Hield duo in the scope I just did, like they started with Haliburton a lot, right? So like he's included in those. Like if you just look at Buddy Hield on the court, Tyrese Haliburton not on the court, Pacers offensive rating is 109.9. Like that's not very good, right?
That is the worst in the league this year.
That'd be worse than the league. Wow.
Yes, Charlotte is at 110.
Yeah, so they clearly complement each other in a significant way. It's just how, like, can you make Buddy, and the fact that the numbers are decent with McConnell and Nembhard are still important. So it's like, can you stick him in a role that still makes sense for him and the team when he isn't glued to your franchise cornerstone as much? And maybe the solution is you just play those two together as much as you can so you maximize their talents. But you already nailed it. Then you're running into the problem of how do you get the rest of your young guys on the floor? TJ McConnell's also in this mix as a rotation guy. Like, there's too many names. There's not too many names. They have the right number of names. It's just how do you mix and match the right combinations in a way that is both productive to your success now and your success in the future. And as Buddy Hield's moved to the bench, I've kind of wondered what that means for, and some of it is that Haliburton's out, but like what that means for him, what that means for the lineups, how it all shakes out. Like he's had some effective games in the second unit stretch. You know, the 16-pointer in Atlanta was impressive. He's been mostly efficient in these moments. Not great. Like I think he even thinks he'd be better, but he's been fine. And I think they're exploring a little bit what he can be for a second unit. He's going to provide spacing no matter who's at point guard. It could be me, and a defender would be Buddy Hield. So that's still important. That's still helpful for everybody. Like I don't think the offense will ever be just like god awful if he's on the floor. But there's a lot to explore about what he can do without the guy who knows him best in the league.
And I think the pace with which Haliburton plays is massive too, because the trailing threes that Buddy Hield can hit, because everybody, if Tyrese Haliburton is screaming down the floor with the ball, like everybody's going to be watching him, which is crazy because then you're like, oh, hey, Buddy Hield's wide open. How did Buddy Hield get wide open? So, oh, yeah. And I think McConnell does a great job of pushing the ball as well, but it's just completely different type of player. So I think that's another part of it is just, you're probably getting, if you're playing him with Haliburton, you're also probably playing him with Miles Turner, which means you're probably getting more stops, which means you're out in transition. You're running a lot more. If you're playing with TJ McConnell and Jordan Nwora and Jalen Smith, you're probably not getting as many stops. So then you're at half. I don't know. There's probably some explanation for it. But again, I think it's good information to have. It's nice to know that he can just do what he does regardless of who's out there. And I think it's just up to the Pacers to try to find a good balance of, like you said, the present and the future, because he is on the roster. So you need to maximize him while he's on the roster. But it's also like, how much are you going to bend your roster to Buddy Hield moving forward?
A slightly smaller version of this that was very recent Pacers history is Sabonis and Doug McDermott, where it's like,
yeah, oh
man, this is a lethal duo. Like you can just two-man action these two on the left wing and make the defense panic or worry about a back cut or a shot or a hand or a million things, to the point that it's like, okay, if we're the Pacers, we should change our rotation to be Sabonis is playing bench minutes, so that he's playing with McDermott. But then you have to sub differently where he's the first big that comes out instead of Turner. And so, like, how does that make Turner better? And what lineups does he fit with? When should McDermott come into the game? Like, you have to think about all these questions and answers. Now, that pairing did not have a factor of long-term growth involved in the way that the Pacers young guards currently do. But, like, they had to think about those things on how to maximize those guys. And McConnell and McDermott were good as well. But then you have two non-shooters. There's all these questions to answer. And I think now with Buddy Hield and Haliburton, you're getting into something similar where it's like, McDermott helped other groups, but he clearly fit really well with this one player. How do you marry all that up and get to it? One more break here, guys, so I could talk to you about FanDuel. The NBA playoffs, they're so close to here, and now's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back. If your first bet doesn't win, just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, it's secure, it's super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. your spreads, your money lines, your point totals, your rebounds, assist props, your 2x3, a FanDuel exclusive 2 3-pointer score in the first 3 minutes of a game. And FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. One more thing to talk about today, Rhett. It's the New York Knicks, who the Pacers play not only tonight, but also on Sunday. So we get the double duty today. Look, Pacers are eliminated. The game itself, there's not a lot to break down. You don't know who's going to play. You don't know when they're going to play. The Knicks might try. They might not. They're basically locked into fifth no matter what happens the rest of the way. They need one win or one Nets loss to clinch 5. And they have 3 games for they have 3 games and the Nets have 3 games. They're going to be fifth. Maybe they just try to beat up on the Pacers Wednesday and get it sealed. Either way, to talk about the Knicks, I'd like to talk about the Knicks by not talking about their current team and talking about their team last year. They had an interesting thing happen where Julius Randle was amazing in 2020-21. Like, holy cow, where did this guy come from? He's an all-NBA lock. He's shooting threes. He's really good for our team. And RJ Barrett's ascending a little bit. And hey, look, Nerlens Noel's helping us as a center, and Elfrid Payton's like our point guard, and this is working. And Mitchell Robinson's good, and Obi Toppin's okay, and Derrick Rose is good. And holy cow, we're the 5 seed. Things were great. And then everything was terrible the very next season, and they completely missed the playoffs. And for a young and interesting team with an all-star, they were no longer a young and interesting team with an all-star, and now they're back to awesome again. So how do the Pacers avoid this? Look, they're not in year 1 of what the Knicks were when we're starting this exercise. The Knicks were a good playoff team. People thought they could beat the Hawks that year. They didn't, but people thought they could. The Pacers aren't that far ahead. But what they were is a team with an all-NBA talent and some other ascending players that took a massive step back in year 2 of said construction and coaching. What happened to the Knicks? They rebounded. Things are looking good now. How do the Pacers avoid something similar?
Don't look at a kind of mediocre core that had like 6 career years on it that are all approaching 30, if not over it, and run it back to signing 3-year contracts for Derrick Rose, Alec Burks, and a 4-year contract for Evan Fournier that was terrible the second the ink dried. That's pretty much it. And I get the idea of it because it's like, man, that was awesome. Like, Randall was incredible, hit a bunch of shots. And so then we're going to extend him. Maybe he gets better. RJ Barrett, like, there were great reasons for optimism, but at the same time, like, you have to be careful about going so far out of your way to retain Nerlens Noel, Kemba Walker, Alec Burks, Taj Gibson, Derrick Rose, Evan Fournier. Like, are those the pieces you want to be investing in? Like, yes, they were great, but where does that put you in the East? And so I think the Pacers are kind of going to look at like a smaller version of this with guys like Jordan Nwora, Aaron Nesmith. You know, it's like, what are you going to get by locking up those guys into your core? And it's obviously very different because those guys are actually ascending and they're young and their contract structure is different and all that. But like, you just have to be careful being so enamored with the overachieving you did last year and using that as a basis to kind of run it back with a team that it was considered overachieving for a reason. Like, the roster just wasn't incredible and people were doubting you. It's just kind of iffy. And I really, really hope the Pacers can look at that. Kind of a similar thing with the Atlanta Hawks, but we're not playing them the rest of the year. So
you said Evan Fournier. This is unrelated to any point you just made. He's played 8.5 minutes total since the trade deadline. That is up there with the worst contracts in the NBA. That is a disaster.
He's played 24 games all year.
That is, and that was like I thought that was a good signing. Like, he was good for that, like that great. But he was good for Orlando in a way, and even Boston, to the point that like teams were giving up 1st-round picks for him. Like, it's kind of help the Knicks. Yikes, that is not working out. Yeah, that's a good way to kind of parse through it, right? Fournier wasn't what they wanted. It's funny that I immediately go to him after saying that. Kemba was in this mix. Like, they threw in Kemba Walker.
Noel.
That didn't work at all, right?
Yep.
A lot of the new stuff was just like, oh, this didn't work from what we were growing off of. So yes, knowing that is important. And I think they put their young guys in too big of shoes for where they were, like expecting that internal development to just naturally take them up. RJ Barrett playing a crap ton and only shooting 41% from the field. And Mitchell Robinson was good and made like every shot he took, like he always does, but like quickly wasn't quite ready for the role he had at that time. Same with Grimes. Those guys are ready now. Maybe that will behoove them, but that was a part of it too. And the big one is, and this one is less predictable, and the Pacers will obviously hope this doesn't happen. Julius Randle just wasn't as good at all. He was so good in 2020-21. There's a reason he was all NBA that year. He might end up there this year. I don't know. Right? Like leading the league in minutes, hitting 41% of his threes. And then his field goal percentage dropped to barely over 41. He barely made over 30% of his threes. His rebounding dropped, his playmaking dropped, his scoring, like everything was worse. And when your team is like, hey, this guy's awesome, and all of a sudden that guy's not awesome, you're not as good. And hey, look, he's awesome again this year, and they're great again. And it's not all on him, but that is the part that makes this maybe not a good comp. Is just if Haliburton's good again next year, it won't matter as much about some of the little stuff. And let me be totally clear. I think Haliburton's going to be better next year than he was this year,
yes,
by a decent amount. That is the part that you would hope to avoid as any team, really.
Tony, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know why you would expect a guy who shot 41% from three in 1 year and 29% in the 5 seasons preceding that to not be real. I don't know why that shooting gap isn't real. But yeah, no, and I think that's one thing where the comp is a little bit different for the Pacers because they're quote unquote franchise player. I guess Randall did make all NBA, so you can consider him a franchise player if you want.
He might again.
It honestly probably will. So he'll be a 2-time all NBA and still probably not a franchise player. But like Haliburton's going to get better. Like if he doesn't get better, that I guess I'll lose a lot of money. I don't know what will happen if Haliburton doesn't get better, but like the framework of the team is very different too. But looking at, I think the guys like Obi Toppin, who had their development stunted, like they just did not get minutes because the Knicks overachieved. And then they were like, oh shoot, like we can be good. Let's go do that. And then they were bad trying to be good and still did not give Obi Toppin very many minutes. And so then you have guys like Emmanuel Quickley, obviously RJ Barrett in bigger roles that I do think behooved them, but was that the best context for them to be in? Like, so I think finding a way to, yes, put pressure on your young guys early, to put them in games that matter, to give them the sort of experience to fall back on. That way it's not their first time in the playoffs since their first time playing a meaningful game because you just tanked your butts off for 3 years. But at the same time, like you have to find ideal, like good developmental reps for players that are in your system that you drafted for a reason. Like they took over, was he 7th, 8th? Like that would be like the Pacers getting the 7th pick next year, taking their guy and being like, you know what? Let's bring Buddy Hield back, play him 37 minutes a game. Like that would be insane just because they overachieved. And so I don't think that we have to worry too much about retaining a bunch of old vets that helped us overachieve this year. But there is a cautionary tale there of, like maybe some expectations need to be tempered when a guy clearly has an outlier season. Like you can hope that is a developmental trajectory, but it also could just be hot shooting. And obviously over a course of a year, like that's impressive, but there's definitely some noise there that should be paid attention to.
It's easier to say in hindsight, obviously, because Randall came back to earth a little bit in the following year. That like if you made a graph of his seasons since he joined the league, it was like, I'll try to do this on YouTube. You can't see me doing it. It was like here, and then here, and then here, and then here, and then here. And like maybe that's not what you expect. Whereas Haliburton's been like here, here, here. Like that's more reasonable to expect.
A lot more linear for Haliburton than
right.
Well, I guess Randall's was linear in a different direction. It was more like horizontal, and then an extreme.
Every trend line is in fact a line.
That's true. I guess you were wanting more. That was like an exponential because it's like a very small incremental, and then it was like straight up. Yeah,
I can't believe I just said parabola on today's podcast. I re-downloaded Guitar Hero onto my computer today. I've had quite the nerdy day, Rhett. So
goodness
I'm glad
gracious.
I get to say. That's how you know there's only 3 games left in the season. I still have it right next to me. Like I'm ready to go.
Man, he is not joking. That is hilarious.
We're ready to go. Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I don't think like the situations aren't similar enough for me to think that the Pacers should be worried about something similar happening where it's like, oh, sweet, we figured it out. The vibes are good. Oh crap. I don't think that is something they can run into. But like you said, I think the right word is cautionary tale. Take a little note from the New York franchise. And hey, maybe teams will go, look, they bounced right back. Maybe things are good. And that's true. But you never want to go from terrible to awesome vibes to no vibes very quickly. It's very hard to get your fans back from a no vibes team. And it's hard to get your team back from a no vibes team.
Yeah, turning a 2-year plan into a 3-year plan doesn't usually go super great.
Yeah, it honestly now that I just went through that, honestly makes this Knicks season a little more impressive. The fact that they were able to save whatever the heck happened last season. I guess getting Jalen Brunson will do that.
I was going to say, I think they knew they were getting Jalen Brunson like 3 games into the 2021-22 season, it seems like.
That does help.
That does help.
That does change your trajectory a little bit. But yeah, good notes here. Pacers Knicks tonight. Again, the Knicks are 1 win away. They'll have 47 if they win, and the Brooklyn Nets peak wins is 46. So that would clinch the Knicks into the 5th seed. They cannot catch the Cavs. So once they get that 5th seed, they have no incentive to try anymore, but they have 1 more day potentially of putting in some effort to lock up a seed so they can avoid that Philly bracket in the first round. Rhett, where can people follow you and all your work covering not really just the Pacers, really everything?
Yeah, it's kind of weird to tell people what I do because it's like, yeah, I cover the Pacers, but like I also talk about a lot of things, and so it's weird. You can find me.
Your feed is more everything than Pacers now. Right now, I would say
it is. Yeah, well, the Pacers aren't playing meaningful basketball, so it's kind of hard to make it Pacers. But we'll get back on that in the offseason. So you can find me and all my non-Pacers content apparently on Twitter at Rhett_Bauer. And I actually did write something for iPacersblog in January talking about why the Indiana Pacers should look back before moving forward, referencing this exact Knicks team and the cautionary tale that it should serve, looking for a team that overachieved and leaned into it rather than sort of using it as like, okay, pat yourselves in the back, but like, let's be realistic about where we are going.
Highly recommend reading that and following Rhett on whatever social app you use, if that social app is Twitter, for the extent that we can still use the Bird app. It's the dog app today. I don't know if anyone cares about that. What? Did we
doesn't
ever
make
get an
sense.
explanation for that? It doesn't make sense. There's a dog on my Twitter feed for absolutely no reason, and I still have no idea why. And the day is about to end, and maybe it'll be gone tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Tomorrow, we're talking Pacers Knicks, what happened in the game, what other stuff happened around the league, because that's just as relevant to the Pacers as their own results for these last 5 days. And Gabe York might debut. We'll see if anybody else has a standout game, all sorts of interesting stuff as we close out this season. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.